The reduced gravity well of Mars and its position in the solar system may facilitate Mars-Earth trade and may provide an economic rationale for continued settlement of the planet. Given its size and resources, this might eventually be a place to grow food and produce equipment to mine the asteroid belt. But friends, how can this be possible? Let's try to understand through this video by diving deep into the details as per our current status. On the 21st of July 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first man in history to step foot on the moon. Since then, just 10 more people, all astronauts from the USA, followed in their footsteps over the span of less than 4 years. Today, tragically, only 4 of the 12 men who ever set foot on another celestial body are still alive. The longest time spent on the moon was just over 22 hours, and in total, the 6 missions were there for less than 4 days. The reason humanity hasn't been back is not due to lack of capacity. The technology available to take us to the moon today is light years better than what NASA had in the 1960s, and yet it's been more than 50 years since we last checked in. The real reason is obviously economics. Even with advancements in technology and a significantly richer global economy as a whole, it just doesn't make sense to go back to the moon because there's nothing there, at least at the moment, to make even that relatively short journey worth it. A mission to Mars is in a completely different league. The best laid out plans today would take a 2 years round trip, where a mission to the moon took just over a week. It's 200 times as far, and it will take 100 times as long. So it will need 100 times the supplies, and there is 100 times the opportunity for something to go wrong. Controlling all of this is going to take an immense amount of resources, and ultimately there's still nothing there to make this economically at least worthwhile. There is a good chance that a government or a group of governments, or maybe even a private company like Elon Musk, SpaceX, or Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, will make the necessary investments to get a human on Mars for the same reason that we put humans on the moon 50 years ago. Space programs trying to be the first to do something, just so they can say they were the first to do it, have given us amazing technologies that have provided far more value to the global economy than was ever spent chasing these goals. On top of that, it did this while coming without the terrible consequences of technologies from institutions like the military. So even if this is a waste of money, it's probably better that governments around the world waste money on aiming rockets at space than at each other's capital cities. But despite the arguments in favor of limited time feats of human ingenuity, it becomes just as difficult again to justify what a lot of people are calling for. And that's a permanent human settlement, either in space or on Mars. We can commit a lot of resources to go to these places just to say that we've been there. Especially now, the world has many times more resources than it did 50 years ago. But to stay there is another question entirely. To stop Mars from becoming a place that we visit a few times and then don't return to for another half century, there needs to be a long-term economic justification for a colony there. Otherwise, it'll be little more than a very impressive science demonstration. So, are there any ways to make permanent settlements in outer space economically viable? If so, what would they be doing? And finally, if not, what would need to change to make this happen? Given the cost of sending just about anything into space, I wonder if it will ever be a thing to offer a friend a cup of coffee when they come to visit you in your environmentally controlled home on Mars. That polite offer could end up costing tens of thousands of dollars if the beings had to come all the way from Earth. On the most fundamental level, and from the very beginning of life on Earth, there is needed to be a reason for even the most basic organisms to move from their current environment into a new environment. Be that to gain access to new food or resources, find more living space to expand the species, or just to avoid threats that existed in their current environment. From microorganisms all the way up to modern national economies, things aren't going to establish themselves where there's no competitive advantage to doing so. Getting access to more resources is the obvious reason to venture into space. Here on Earth, we have a fundamentally limited supply of resources, and that reality is at the heart of the central economic problem, which is that humans have unlimited desires, but only limited resources in which to fulfill those desires. Becoming a spacefaring civilization could hypothetically, for all intents and purposes, give humanity access to unlimited resources, which would fundamentally alter the nature of economics itself. There are millions of asteroids in our solar system that are made up of trillions of dollars worth of materials, each at current market prices. Of course, as people will quickly point out, if we started harvesting those resources en masse, the value of those precious metals materials would drop significantly. But that's kind of the point. If humanity had an effective abundance of everything it needed to provide people with the goods and services they demanded, and the need for a market system itself would be redundant. The market system is just a tool that economic participants use to deal with the fundamental economic problem of limited resources. It's a very effective tool, and it helps us decide what gets produced, how much gets produced, and who it gets produced for. But it's still ultimately just a tool. Now, of course, there are a few problems with this idealistic projection of the future. Over a long enough time horizon, humanity could just grow to fill the constraints of this new, more plentiful supply of resources. We are already reaching the finite limits of a lot of Earth's resources, where even just 100 years ago, that would be almost unfathomable. Global output, enhanced global utilization of everything, looks like this. It wasn't until the 1800s, well into the swing of the Industrial Revolution, though the world was producing $1 trillion worth of output every year. This year, the world is on track to produce over $100 trillion in outputs. We generate that output by harvesting resources and turning those resources into more valuable resources. This is a cumulative measure. A lot of this added value doesn't go anywhere, apart from fossil fuels, which are, as far as we're aware, a uniquely earthbound resource. There are billions of times as many minerals, metals, and even commodities like water floating around just in our solar system. At our current exponential rate of growth, that would give us resource abundance for another few centuries. But that is making the assumption that the growth wouldn't increase if we got access to all these extra resources. In reality, assuming a situation where we could economically harvest all of these materials, we would probably hit scarcity limits for something much sooner than we expected. That's also a very big assumption. Of course, the real problem with getting access to all these materials is that by the time they're brought back here to Earth, where they would actually be demanded, we would have committed thousands of times more resources than what we get in return. Getting off the planet is getting cheaper thanks to new technologies. But at the moment, there are no resources worth making the journey, even if they are practically infinitely abundant. That's especially true for operations on another celestial body. Bringing materials from asteroids and microgravity in a way that adds more value to the economy than it costs is already beyond our current technology for now. Getting over the challenge of escaping Earth's gravity and then descending onto something like Mars with its own gravity, only then to need to get off it again, and then descend to Earth is something else entirely. This is not an economic problem that's even unique to space travel either. Even here on Earth, there are plenty of regions that are not economically prosperous because their geography makes them uncompetitive in global markets. There is an extremely strong correlation between economic underperformance and economies that are landlocked. The only exception to this rule being wealthy European countries that developed their local economies well before global trade became a prominent determinant of economic success. The disadvantages of a landlocked economy are so well documented that the United Nations even has a special office to provide assistance to these countries. The reason that this is such a big disadvantage is because without direct access to the world's oceans, these countries can't use container ships to directly export their goods around the world or to supply their local economies with imports. Friends, what are your thoughts on this issue? Do let us know by commenting below. If you liked the video and you want us to cover more details about this same, then feel free to drop a comment for the same. See you in the next interesting video. Until then, thank you for watching this video until the end.